Hello, everyone. Welcome again to the Rotten Horror Picture Show, the horror movie podcast where we talk about films off of the Rotten Tomatoes 200 Best Horror Movies of All Time list. My name is Clay, and with me, as always, is Amanda. Amanda, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I am good. I'm excited to talk about the movie we're talking about today. It's a weird one because it's one that I saw, weird for me only because I saw it and I loved it, and then I don't think I've watched it since that first time, which is generally unusual for me. I usually tend to go back and rewatch stuff I really like, but I never did for some reason. Yeah. We are talking about 2012's Cabin in the Woods, which has a 92% Rotten Tomatoes score and is number 30 on this list, which I think we're going to have a lot to talk about when it comes to placement on the list for this, because
Yes.
that feels very high. As much as I do enjoy this movie, it feels very high. But had you seen this one before?
Yes, actually, I think this might be, other than my wild card picks, I think this might be one of the only movies we've done so far that I have seen more than you have.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, I think I've seen this like 4 times.
I was really hoping you were going to say twice. Because I was going to be, well, a win is a win, I guess.
Right. I mean, I'm going to take what I can get. But
yeah.
No, I think this was like the 4th time I watched it. Yeah.
Yeah. I assume you were a fan then?
Yes.
Yeah, this is I was thinking about why I hadn't come back and watched this one more, and I think it was one of those ones where there's a lot of movies that I really enjoy that I would like to watch again, but I don't want to just put them on. I would like to watch them. And I think this was one of those where it's like, okay, I'm going to watch Cabin in the Woods, and I'm going to actually like sit down and watch it at some point, but I never just got the chance to do that.
Gotcha.
But that's also kind of strange because I feel like you could throw this on while you're doing something else very easily and still have a good time with it. Yes,
I think that's at least one, if not 2 of my 4 watches was more of just the like, oh, this is fun. Let me just put this on.
Yeah, I'm surprised I haven't done that because I'm always looking for stuff to throw on in the background while I'm working. And this is a very fun one just from dialogue standpoint that you don't really need to always be paying that close attention to. So maybe I just need to be less of a snob about it, I guess.
I would actually argue that this is maybe even a little more fun if you're paying a little less attention to it.
Yeah. I've always thought that's the mark of a great movie, is if you're only paying half attention and you still come away going, wow, that was amazing. Then I guess it must be really good. But we are going to take a quick break and play the trailer, and then we will come back and talk about Cabin in the Woods.
Everybody ready? The show on the road!
Doesn't even show up on the GPS. It's unworthy of global positioning.
That's the whole point. Get off the grid, right?
Hello? I'm thinking this thing doesn't take credit cards.
Sign says closed.
We're looking for, what's it called?
Tillerman Road.
Well, to get you there, getting back. That's your concern.
Oh, this is awesome.
Whoa. No way.
The lambs have passed through the gate. They are come to the killing floor.
Get this party started!
I seriously believe something weird is going on.
What is that thing?
We have to stay together. This isn't right. We should split up.
Yeah, good idea.
Really?
We gotta get out of here.
Somebody sent those things here to get us. You're missing the point. I want to see us punished. I think I can get it to go down. Do we want to go down?
Okay, Cabin in the Woods from 2012. As I said, number 30 on our list, 92% Rotten Tomatoes score. Directed by Drew Goddard, written by Joss Whedon and Drew Goddard, starring Kristen Connolly, Chris Hemsworth, Richard Jenkins, Bradley Whitford, and a gigantic godly hand, which I have some thoughts about. The literal hand of God, I guess. Yeah. Amanda, what happens in Cabin in the Woods?
When 5 college friends arrive at a remote forest cabin for a little vacation, little do they expect the horrors that await them. One by one, the youths fall victim to backwoods zombies. But there is another factor at play. 2 scientists are manipulating the ghoulish goings-on, but even as the body count rises, there is yet more at work than meets the eye.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Clay. This is a long one. So, as they say, hold on to your butts. Things you will find in this movie include...
Yes.
Werewolf, alien beast, mutants, wraths, zombies, reptiles, clowns, witches, sexy witches, demons.
Important distinction.
Yes, absolutely. Different categories entirely. Demons, Hell Lord, angry molesting tree.
Yes.
That's a great reference. Giant snake. Deadites. Kevin.
Actually, technically that's not true because we never do see Kevin. But I'll allow it.
Mummy. All right. Kevin, Mummy, the Bride, the Scarecrow Folk, Snowman, Dragon Bat, Vampires, Dismemberment Goblins, Sugar Plum Fairy, Merman, the Reanimated, Unicorn, the Huron?
The Huron, as in the Native American people, I believe.
Oh.
I saw somewhere it's I forget. Let me look it up real quick.
All right. I'm going to finish while you do. All right, the Huron. Sasquatch / Wendigo / Yeti. Dolls. The Doctors, which I like to believe are the doctors from the show, The Doctors. Zombie Redneck Torture Family. Jack-o'-lantern, Giant, and Twins.
People still
I would not
get
have put that
right?
reference together.
People still get that
I
reference,
guess.
Right? Yes, quite a few monsters in this one.
Yes.
The thing I was looking up for the Huron, I guess it's just sort of, at least on the IMDb trivia, it's a tangential. They think it's a tangential reference to a Buffy the Vampire Slayer episode that both of these guys worked on, because both of these writers, Joss Whedon and Drew Goddard, are writers on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which comes through in a number of different ways in this movie.
Yes.
Joss Whedon, Drew Goddard has quite a resume, but he doesn't have as much of a what's the word I'm looking for? He's not as well known, I guess, as Joss Whedon. Joss Whedon is pretty zeitgeisty as far as genre stuff goes. But Drew Goddard, he wrote Cloverfield, he wrote on Buffy and Angel, he wrote on Alias, he wrote on Lost, he wrote World War Z and The Martian. He was the creator of the Daredevil show on Netflix. So he's got quite the street cred when it comes to genre stuff. But it's tough to watch this and not think Joss Whedon, because his name and I think his style is pretty prevalent. What are your thoughts on Joss Whedon? generally as I guess I should say his work, not the person.
So I have mixed feelings because, as I'm sure many people could easily predict if you have listened to any of this podcast before, I loved Buffy the Vampire Slayer as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And so part of me will always kind of like have a soft spot for Joss Whedon and his work. Mm-hmm. But while I have matured, I often feel like his style has not matured along with me.
Sure.
Yeah. It's just, it gets a little like, too much of like, oh, this is your shtick, and you stick really closely to it. And I would give you that most of the time it works, but when it doesn't, it really doesn't.
Yeah, I would agree. I think I also, if anyone has listened to any of our other shows, you'll know that I'm a very big Buffy the Vampire Slayer fan. But I generally didn't really like a lot of his other TV stuff. I think he's a very good writer. And I think his style works selectively. I think it works in when it's a little bit restrained outside of Buffy, because Buffy is pretty much like 100% him style wise. But like I did not like Firefly because I didn't think the style fit in Firefly. But I do really like this, and I thought his work on the Avengers movies was really good. I think he's a really good writer, that when he's got a little bit of his capital J, capital W, Joss Whedon style dialed back a little bit, I think it works the best. And I think this movie is a really nice kind of mix of his thing and just straight storytelling and straight character work. It's not too heavy. It's a nice middle ground. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I would agree. I feel like the difficult thing with like Joss Whedon's style is that it is so immediately recognizable.
Yeah.
That at times this movie can feel a little uneven because it slips in and out of that mode frequently. So there are times where it's almost like, I'm trying to think of a good example, and of course I'm not coming up with one, where it almost feels like you've switched gears a little bit, and then you kind of, the transition back into the Joss Whedon mode can feel a little like, I don't know, a little jarring sometimes, but I do think it works. I do think overall, with the tone of the movie and the tempo that it keeps, I think it does work.
Yeah, I think what works for me in that regard in this one is that the tone is really kind of split between the two storylines, because you've got your above ground story, which is essentially the meta sort of explanation as to why so many horror movies play out the same way and have the same archetypes and whatnot. It's because it's being puppeteered by this other group, which is sort of the underground story, who is doing this basically because they have to appease these gods who will destroy the world if they don't run these scenarios where the same archetypes get killed and all this kind of stuff. And the above ground story is played very straight for the most part. There's some jokiness to it, but it doesn't feel out of place. Like, it's not too heavy on the here's a super serious moment and someone's going to crack wise about it. Like, they don't, oddly enough, the above ground story isn't meta in and of its, in like the dialogue. It's meta in the depiction of it, but it's not really very meta in the dialogue and whatnot. Whereas the below ground story is very much more of the Whedon thing dialed up, where you've got these characters who are capital C characters, and that's where more of the comedy is being pumped into, is, you know, the mundane white collar guys who work in this lab, basically controlling this situation.
Yeah, it is definitely like interesting tonally when you shift between those two stories. Because the guys running the show are definitely the ones that I think you can kind of tell that like Whedon had the most fun writing that side of it. Like, because it's just clear, like he gives them kind of the lines that or probably the lines he loved writing, and like I got the vibe that they had more fun with that part of it than they did with the like quote unquote A plot of 5 college co-eds going on their vacation to a remote cabin in the woods.
Yeah, I do think that's definitely where the fun comes in. But I also do really like the way that they take the opportunity to, before they even really explain what's going on, they subvert things nicely to kind of lead you into the situation that they're setting up. So when you meet your virgin archetype, the first thing you find out about her is that she's been having an affair with one of her teachers. And when you meet the jock archetype, the first thing you find out about him basically is that he's actually very smart and he's not just a dumb jock.
Right.
And the other one that I also really enjoy that comes into play a lot later is that your paranoid stoner character turns out to be right, which is fun. Instead of just being there for a comedic effect, his paranoia is warranted.
Yeah, and that's actually really great because he's the only one of the 5 of them that you really never get a glimpse of him and who he is outside of his archetype.
Yeah, he pretty much stays the same.
Exactly, and like like you were saying, when we're introduced to Dana, who's like the quote-unquote virgin, she's talking about how she was sleeping with her professor and now they broke up or he dumped her. Jules, who's the whore, is like in a long-term committed relationship with Kurt, and she just dyed her hair blonde. Like she's not even really like the dumb blonde stereotype. It's like not her at all. Like you said, Kurt's actually he's on the football team, but he's really smart. You find out a little bit more later that Holden is like a nerd, but also like you find out first he's also on the football team. And then he sort of becomes the nerd. But yeah, Marty the stoner is always just a stoner. Like, at least in the first half to 3/4 of the movie, when he rolls up to the house, he is smoking out of a gigantic bong in his car. He's really given no personality traits beyond weed and sarcasm. And so it's fun that the sort of inversion of that like he then ends up being right.
Wait, you're saying he has no other characteristics besides weed and sarcasm? Get it? Weed and sarcasm? Weed and sarcasm?
Well, that'll be all for me, folks. It's been a good run.
I'm sorry, someone's clicking the lights in this room. I don't know if that means I'm supposed to leave or what, but
oh God, Clay. All right.
Speaking of that bong apparently that bong that collapses into a travel mug was apparently a working. Yeah, it apparently was a working travel mug. The whole thing worked. It actually worked as a bong, and it actually worked to telescope down into a travel mug, and it apparently cost $5,000 to make.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Wow.
But I how do you feel about meta fiction in general? Because it's funny that I was listening to our episode on Scream today. I was editing that, and so I've also just came off of listening to this very long dissertation, or thesis video about this one person's interpretation of what Twin Peaks is about, which is very, very meta influenced and has a lot of, it actually made me think about this. I was thinking about that a lot as I was watching this movie because there were some things that popped up that were kind of similar. So I've had kind of meta on the brain for the past few days. But we never really, on the Scream episode, we never really talked about how we feel about the idea of meta fiction or meta horror in particular.
I think I'm trying to figure out like under what circumstances and like what examples of it I've kind of experienced. And of course, like I'm thinking mainly about this one and Scream because those are the big ones. I think I have like a natural inclination towards over-analysis, hence why I go to school and hence why I do this podcast with you.
I thought we were just friends. I didn't realize that it was the over-analysis that you really enjoyed. Thanks
yeah. No, I'm just here for the talking points.
Cool.
No, but so I think given that I have a tendency to like it and sort of be drawn towards it, but I'm also very aware that it can get very tedious for some people and in some circumstances. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I do. I think for me there's a level of cleverness that needs to be baked into it, where if you're winking at the camera too much, I think that it overstays its welcome very quickly. And if the only point of being meta is to be meta, I think you're kind of missing the point to an extent. And I don't like that stuff as much, but I do really like it in something like this, where it is telling a story that completely kind of stands on its own merit, but does have this meta secondary level to it. I mean, I guess it's probably an equally on the surface level, but the meta aspect of it is very cleverly and very smartly employed, because it's taking a question that really nobody really asks. If they do, they kind of ask it facetiously. It's like, how come these campers keep going back to this place where everybody keeps getting killed? It's like, well, that's yeah, why are they doing that? That's kind of an interesting jumping off point for a story, which lets them sort of look at some of these archetypes and story structures and story styles in a really fresh, kind of clever way. Whether it's the character archetypes or the explanation for where the monsters come from, which I love. As people probably know, I'm a big fan of the Magic Book. And when they went down into the basement and it's just like magic books and talismans and demon resurrection shit as far as the eye could see, I was like, oh yes, this is a movie for me. Because it's one of those things where it's like they're bringing attention to this stuff and they're kind of calling it out, but they're not doing it they're not like breaking the fourth wall to do it, and it doesn't feel like they're trying to prove how smart they are. I just think it's a good story baked or wrapped around this meta idea of why do horror movies play out the way that they do.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, and I really like that aspect of this movie as well. And when you were saying that about like the more meta stuff, that you enjoy it more when it's not like constantly kind of winking at the camera, it made me think of Wes Craven's New Nightmare, and how like part of the problem for me with that movie was that it was kind of constantly like wink wink nudge nudge. Yeah. Like this specific in-group is who we're doing this for. Whereas this movie is more like, we're going to take all the stereotypes and cliches of a typical horror movie since, the 70s leading up through now. And not only is like the twist on it kind of a fresh way to explore those cliches, it also does this neat trick at the same time of tying it back to like general storytelling traditions throughout like history. Like we keep saying like the different the kids who go to the cabin are all these different archetypes, and these archetypal figures are in our stories going back, you know, like hundreds of and thousands of years into like mythology.
Right. Yeah.
And so it's cool where it ties that in of like, yes, we have all these stereotypes in horror movies, but we have been constantly retelling kind of the same stories over and over again for most of human history. And like, it gives you a really good explanation for why that is and why they're important.
Right. And, you know, it kind of leads me to the one beat, and I know you wanted to talk about this a bit, the ending in general, but just to kind of continue in the meta path for a second. One beat that I don't love is at the end where they choose to let the world end, and the god that shows up busts through the ground, and it's this giant hand. It's like the hand of God or something. And the first time I saw it, I remember thinking, I really don't like that it's a human hand, because they talk about the old gods and this, you get through the whole movie, you're getting this like monstery rumble kind of thing. And then you finally get an illustration of this, and it's just a giant human hand, and it's kind of weird. And watching it this time, I realized, well, it's kind of weird, but it's really in line with the secondary sort of meta story that they're telling, where not only are they showing you, oh, here's the explanation as to why all these things keep happening in horror movies. The whole movie is really a metaphor for creating these stories in general. So you've got the people who are underground are acting as essentially the filmmakers, and you've got what's his name? Bradley Whitford and Richard Jenkins are ostensibly the writer and director, who are, or I guess they were more like the writers, because the director is Sigourney Weaver.
Yeah,
but
literally.
But the monsters that the gods that they are appeasing are the audience, and the audience are the ones who want to see the blood, and who, you have to make sure you hit all these beats to satisfy the audience. So it makes sense in that reading that the hand that you see at the end, the hand of God, is a human hand, because it is, the implication is that these gods are us, essentially. I still think it's a boring choice, but if that's why they did it, I guess it makes sense. But it got me thinking. I was thinking about that stuff because this Twin Peaks thing I was watching was discussing Twin Peaks as this, it was really delving into the depths of how deep the metatextualness of it goes. Talking about how Cooper is a stand-in for the audience and all this other stuff that's too involved for me to really get into. It was a pretty interesting video, if you're into that kind of thing. But yeah, it just got me thinking about that stuff on another level removed, and I was like, oh yeah, I guess that's the same kind of thing in Cabin in the Woods, because they are making a comment about making stories as much as they are making a comment about the things that are in those stories.
Yeah, I really like that reading. I hadn't really thought about it that way until you were saying this. So like, I find that really interesting, and especially like it kind of makes you think back on certain like lines and moments in this movie that almost seemed like they were kind of one-dimensional. Like there's the scene with the two guys, and they're like watching Jules and Kurt hook up, and they're like, come on, like show us some boobs or whatever, and the lead security dude behind them is like, really? And he turns and he's like, hey, we're not the only ones watching.
Right.
And it's kind of like, oh, I like that. I like that, like, when you're watching the movie, you think they're referring to these sort of eldritch horror gods. And instead, it can also be referring to us.
Right.
I like that dimension of it. That's a neat observation.
Yeah, there's a level of satisfaction that you always hear the creators of these horror movies talk about. Like there's a famous quote from Wes Craven. I can't remember who he said it to. It was someone asked him about advice for making a horror movie, and he said, "Give him a fright, give him a hard on, and send him home." Or something like that, where it's like there's certain beats that you need to hit, and you always hear these guys talking about. The ones who are a little bit more attuned to the schlockiness are always talking about how it's like, well, we just got to find the right number of people to kill, and just people are coming to see the blood and all this kind of stuff. And I just read a quote from Sean Cunningham, the creator of Friday the 13th, where he said that he realized the key to a great horror movie, or a popular horror movie anyway, isn't creating characters you care about and putting them in peril. It's creating characters that you dislike enough that you're really looking forward to watching them get killed. And it is this weird sort of sacrificial mindset where it's like you're creating these things specifically to appease your God audience kind of thing. And now I'm getting kind of galaxy brained about it here, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I totally get that. It's like we're all clamoring for the sacrifice in one way or another. Yeah, and that's interesting because like the thing that this movie does is it at the beginning gives you, whether or not you like them or you sort of buy it, it gives you characters that are multifaceted to start out with, and then as you go, it flattens them. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Which is unusual. I feel like most movies, especially horror movies, do the opposite. You sort of get your ensemble cast and everybody kind of slots into certain buckets, and it's only after a certain amount of them have gotten killed that the others maybe start like deepening and you start having a little more personality, or you root for them a little harder, and they're sort of like they show that they're more clever than you thought they would be, mm-hmm. or they're braver, or they're more willing to do the crazy thing. And you're like, oh wow, I didn't expect that from the nerd. I had no idea he would be such a badass or whatever. And this movie does the exact opposite. And it just sort of like gradually over the first half of the movie reduces these characters down to these like fundamental parts. Yeah.
There's a trope that I've really come to dislike in a lot of horror movie writing, where there is this there is this perceived need that you have to take a minute like halfway through the movie to throw the audience a bone as far as like, why should I care about these people kind of thing. And there's always, mm-hmm. I feel like it always manifests itself in a scene where about halfway through, maybe like a little bit past halfway, 3/4 of the way through, it's a quiet scene where two characters kind of have a conversation, and one of them like tells a story about their past or something. And it's like, and that's why I took this job, is because I really needed to prove to myself that I could do it, or some shit like that. And it's like, it just feels like a really schlocky way to do that. And I like that they avoid mm-hmm. that in this by, like you're saying, doing it backwards, where you get front-loaded these characters that seem very multifaceted, and then they get hammered down into the one-dimensional characters you're familiar with, which makes for an interesting character, like reverse character arc, like you're saying, but also, in the meta sense, explains why the characters in these movies are so one-dimensional.
Yeah, and on the flip side, it's kind of interesting because I think the more traditional character arc, at least a little bit, is kind of reserved for the people downstairs.
Yeah.
Yeah, where they start out like, I don't know, I definitely read somewhere where apparently they wanted the first scene to be kind of confusing the first time you watch the movie.
Yes, I was reading that too, yeah.
Yeah, where it's the first scene where they're kind of downstairs and they're at like the water cooler, and one of them's bitching because his wife has started baby-proofing the kitchen or something, and they just kind of come off as like bureaucratic assholes. Mm-hmm. And they are like that never really changes, but like as an audience member, your understanding of why they're doing what they're doing changes. And even though they as characters stay pretty much the same, at least for me, like my feelings toward them change. Even though they're still kind of jerks and they're like, tequila and betting on how they're going to murder these kids. By the end of the movie where they're both getting killed, you're kind of hoping that they, maybe they'll make it.
Yeah.
Maybe they'll figure something out. Like, you're like, oh, they're not just like evil bureaucrats working for the director who's trying to like bring about the end of the world. They're actually kind of trying to save it.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, because they ultimately what happens in the story is they lay it all out for these characters, the above ground characters at the cabin, as saying like, we're doing this because the world is going to end if we don't, and then they chose to tell them to go fuck themselves and end the world, which is definitely a choice that you can make. I do want to talk about the underground stuff because I think the above ground stuff is good, but I think it's not where the high point of the story comes from. All of the stuff underground is just so fun and so fresh. Almost fresh, because it's very similar to the group The Initiative from the 4th season of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which is this underground military organization who has been collecting monsters and doing experiments on them and stuff. It's got a very similar vibe. But it's the casting of Richard Jenkins and Bradley Whitford as those two characters is pitch perfect. They are
so perfect.
They have the exact right comic sensibilities for the stuff they're doing. And I just love how they portray this secret underground organization who is quietly puppet mastering the deaths of all of these people and the controlling of these monsters as such just mundane, like, office work.
Yeah.
They're just a bunch of nerds it's their job and it's what they do.
Yeah, there's a chemistry department. I think there's even like an accounting office or something. They've got like maintenance. They're complaining about like they're having like a lame office party where you get that great scene where they're having the party because they think they've done it. They think they're home free, and you get to see the sort of interactions between the characters that you would expect to see in like a TV show about like just like the humorous interpersonal relationships between people who work together. Like, one guy is trying to ask out his coworker and she literally walks away from him in the middle of a sentence. Like, there's the awkward intern who's like trying too hard to fit in. There's like the one creepy dude who's like flirting with every girl he can get near. And it's just so like wonderfully banal.
Yeah,
even though they're like controlling all of these, like controlling the environment and human behavior in a way that's like scary to think about.
Yeah. I think that scene is probably my favorite scene in the movie, the party scene. It's funny, some of the best stuff in this movie apparently was very much in danger of getting cut. I guess that they were going to cut that party scene, or at least cut it way, way down.
Really?
But the director really fought for it, and then they ultimately ended up keeping it. And I guess they were also going to cut the Japanese ghost stuff, which I think is friggin' amazing.
No, yeah, I love that part. That's like my favorite background subplot is them talking throughout the whole movie about like, well, we are practically the best in the business. And they're like, well, technically we're second best. Japan has never failed. And they're like, oh yeah, Japan office. Blah.
Yeah.
And like, it's just so great. It is kind of a reference to also like other cultures around the world that have put out good horror movies. And it's like, yeah, all the horror movies that come out of Japan are fucking terrifying. So it makes sense that they're like the best in the business.
Yeah, and just the story that they tell in those sequences is so funny. How it's this ghost terrorizing a classroom full of little children, and then the little children all join hands and start singing, and they turn it into a frog or something. It's just it very much feels appropriate to that kind of story. It's very, very good.
Yeah, and then one of the guys just like as it's happening, which means that the Japan office has failed, and he's watching it on the monitor. He just starts yelling "fuck you" at the faces of each little Japanese girl on the screen.
Yes. So everything with I think the other brilliant element about this underground stuff is you're so focused on the mechanics that they're presenting you, where it's like you've got this group and the group is controlling what's happening in these, it's controlling the cliches that create these horror movies, and they draw you in so well with the minutia of explaining all these different beats, and also just giving you a fun slasher thing on top of it, that you completely don't even realize they are setting you up for one of the most satisfying payoffs I can think of in a horror movie, which is when they release all of the monsters. And all of the monsters come out and just start wreaking absolute havoc on the people in the underground thing. It's like it's so well set up because you don't even realize what they're doing. Where they're like, oh yeah, it's got all these monsters. They control these monsters. Oh, you're seeing. Oh yeah, I get they've got all these monsters set up here. Like at least when I was watching it the first time, I didn't even consider that they were going to release all these monsters. And when they did, I essentially stood up and started clapping because I thought it was so great.
Yeah, I even like the mechanics of, like, the literal mechanics of it, where Marty and Dana go into the grave that the Buckner family zombies crawl out of, and when they go down there, it's an elevator.
Yes.
Like it's literally like, I don't know, that it's
like Disney World, like the underground tunnels of Disney World.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because I never thought about that like, yeah, this group has all of these monsters at their beck and call, and they will, depending on what the group of teenagers or college kids pick out from the cellar, they then send up the corresponding monster, and like, yeah, they have to do that somehow. So yeah, they send him up with an elevator, and then it makes it look like they're crawling out of a grave.
Yeah.
It's like very clever.
Yeah, and the betting on the monsters is great too. Betting on which one is going to get picked.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, once they release them, I also love that it happens in waves too, because they have to keep, like, there's only a few sets of doors, so one group comes out and starts tearing everybody apart, and then there's kind of a lull, and then the next group comes out and starts tearing everybody apart. It's just
the ding of the elevator.
Yeah, it's so satisfying, and like the payoff to the mermaid thing is fantastic.
Oh god.
It's so great.
I love that it's so ugly.
Yeah.
It's so gross, and he's just like, oh, come on.
Yeah, and they also start, they're also very kind of surprising in who they kill in that sequence as well, because in addition to your above-ground characters and Bradley Whitford and Richard Jenkins, you've got these two other characters who are kind of at the front of the underground story, which is Amy Acker, who plays a character named Lynn, who is the female scientist who interacts with a guy named Truman, played by Brian White, who is kind of a security guard. I don't think they ever really explain exactly what he does, but he seems to be a security guard of sorts.
Yeah, I think he says he's like lead security or like head of security or something.
Yeah, and he is the voice of humanity, I guess, because all of these guys are so, what's the word? Desensitized to what they're doing, that they're betting on it and laughing about it. And he's the one who's kind of new there, so he's kind of like, "What is this really Is this really the right thing that we should be doing? That kind of thing.
Yeah,
And
he's kind of taken aback by their behavior at times.
Yeah. And I couldn't remember what happened with him because they set him up to be almost like he's going to be the one to help save the kids or something.
Yeah, they do.
But he ends up getting killed like almost with no fanfare. He and Lynn both get taken out very quickly, and they don't really spend a lot of time on it.
I mean, at least he gets to, like, he detonates a grenade and kills
true,
a bunch of zombies that are chowing on him. Lynn just gets swooped up by a snake.
Yeah.
That's it. She's just gone.
Yeah, but yeah, I think this movie, the strongest part about this movie for me is that they are very clearly fully aware of what they're doing and what they're in control of as far as how they're choosing to tell the story. And it's very smart and it's very clever. But yeah, the ending. Do you want to talk about the ending, what you did or didn't like about it?
Sure. So in the end, Marty and Dana have made it down to sort of like the lowest level in the creepy temple to the ancient gods area. And Sigourney Weaver is the director. And she's tried to convince Dana to kill Marty, and Dana almost does. And then the monsters get in and kind of break up that scene. And I actually think all of that works and is really great.
Great werewolf, by the way. The monster design.
Werewolf.
The monster design in this movie for how many monsters there are and how little screen time they all really get, they all look great.
Oh my god.
And werewolves,
yeah, they all look really good.
Werewolves are surprisingly easy to screw up, and the werewolf in this movie is a fantastic werewolf. I actually, this time I was watching it going like, man, I wish they did a whole movie with that werewolf because that's a good looking werewolf.
You want to date with that werewolf?
Yeah, there's your movie right there.
Yeah. Oh no, so all of that happens, and then they kind of just decide, like, you know what? Humanity sucks. So let's just not kill Marty, because the whole thing is the fool has to die. Whether or not the virgin lives or dies is sort of like a toss-up. It doesn't actually matter. She just has to suffer. So Marty could have just been like, all right, make it quick. Like, just kill me, or here, I'll do it myself, or I'll jump down into this thing. Like I'm going to just save humanity. And instead, they're both just like, no, humanity sucks. Let's just, we're both going to die right now anyway, but let's just not die in time so that everyone else can then die too.
Yeah.
And I just feel a little bit like, I don't know, you're telling me neither one of these characters has anybody else in the world that they care about, who they don't want to suffer a horrible, horrible death.
Yeah.
Like, they know this stuff is real. They've been immersed in it. They've seen these monsters. They know that these people, as awful as they have been in trapping them into this situation, aren't lying to them. This is gonna happen.
Right.
And yet they're still like, my mom, my dad, my aunt, my grandma, my dog, like, just fucking kill them all. Flush it down the toilet. I'm over it.
Yeah, it is.
It's kind of like,
it is fairly, I don't know if selfish is, I guess it's kind of selfish, but it's not like they survive or anything. How do you think you would feel if she ended up shooting Marty, or some version of that where the system gets preserved?
I think if it were as simple as she ends up shooting Marty, it maybe wouldn't have been very satisfying. But I think there's a way you could have done it where, like, what's his face? The intern, like, shows up at the last minute. You kind of don't notice him, and he manages to do it or something. He manages to kill Marty. Like, I just feel like there's a way you could have done it that even would have left Dana alive at the end. and maybe had to be like, I don't know. I'm not against the idea of them both living through it, but I'm against the idea that they would both live through it knowing that it meant everyone else in the entire world dies. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I guess the issue is that them completing the transaction, so to speak, and having Marty die would mean that, yeah, they save the world, but also it's a preservation of the organization system kind of thing that's going on. And I guess there's probably a way you could spin it. Like, I don't know if that would be any more satisfying to have ultimately the system win. When since the whole thing is about becoming aware of the system and then bucking the system, I don't know. I don't know if that would be... I think you could probably do it and pull it off, but I'm not totally sure. Like if for whatever happenstance Marty gets killed and everything kind of calms back down, and I guess the cycle continues kind of thing, I guess that ending... Yeah. I guess that ending makes sense. It sort of makes sense as to how it would play out. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I think part of the problem is that this movie kind of writes itself into a corner. Where there really isn't a great satisfying ending. I mean, I could even see one where like Dana dies, and because she dies, it just like, all right, it's not going to work no matter what. And then Marty's like, well, now I'm really not going to help you. I'm going to sit back and smoke this joint and watch these like old gods climb up and destroy everything. Like,
yeah, I think that's probably the way. I think Marty being the last one alive and letting it all burn down makes more sense than both of them being alive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I keep coming back to like, really, you don't like every baby on Earth deserves to die right now. Like, I don't know. I just keep coming back to it and thinking like, for the character of Dana, at least, it doesn't feel like it makes much sense to me.
Yeah, Marty's sitting back and smoking a joint and saying, "Fuck it, it's all bullshit anyway," is more believable, than Dana saying, "Sure, let's let the whole world burn down." I would agree with that. I think, yeah. I'm actually kind of bummed they didn't do that now, because I think that's.
Well, I'm glad I could ruin this movie for you.
Well, no, I don't think you ruined it at all. But it is one of those things where it's like his whole through line is very much it's like I said, it's the proving correct of the paranoid stoner who all he sees is the man controlling you in the system.
Puppeteers.
Even though his parents are probably rich and he probably never had to. Had no hardships in his life. But yeah, making your quote unquote hero the guy who's just like, fuck it, it's all bullshit, which is one of my least favorite attitudes that I come across in real life, because it's always it's always the most difficult to have a conversation with someone who has that sort of mindset. But that would be, I think that would be the way to go if you're going to end the world. I think it should go that way.
Yeah, because I almost got the vibe that this movie was kind of trying to go for a little bit of a Edward Norton and Helena Bonham Carter standing together while the buildings collapse at the end of Fight Club.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And it didn't come off the same way to me. It was sort of like more like, I don't know. It just didn't make sense for two people who were willing to fight so hard for their own survival that they wouldn't want to give the rest of the world a chance to do the same.
Yeah, that's fair. I would agree with that. And also, she apologizes pretty quickly after he just let her get mauled. But I feel like they have a lot to talk about what has been going on, because she pulled a gun on him and then he let her get mauled by a werewolf.
Yeah, and they're both really, really ready to live and let live after that. Or die and let die, as it were.
Yeah. Live briefly and let die soon.
Yeah. I do. It's funny, though, because I as much as I'm like, kind of going against the way this movie ends, I don't hate the ending.
Sure.
Like, I don't hate the idea that the old gods do kind of arise and awaken from their slumber, and that this system is being torn down and all of that. Like, I think all of that's really interesting, and obviously the ending visuals of the aforementioned giant hand coming up out of the earth are pretty cool. Like, it's a silly looking hand, but the concept is pretty cool.
If you oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, if you really want to get galaxy brain about it, and you expand out what the consequences of the ending are, and if you're like, okay, so if the gods are the viewers and they are angry because they don't like the ending of the movie, they've destroyed
That's my hand.
They've destroyed the world, which means they can never make a sequel. So it's this other level of like meta-ness where it's like because the audience reaction was so negative, they can't continue that world and continue the world of the movie.
That's fun. I like that.
Yeah, and I am not on any pharmaceuticals or narcotics or anything at the moment. I mean, I had a couple Tylenol earlier, and maybe that's why I'm just so out there right now. I don't know.
Just been too long in your own house.
Yeah, that's probably part of it too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's going to do it for Cabin Fever. This is...
Nope.
Oh, you got more?
Cabin in the Woods.
Oh, God, I did that again.
Clay has been jerking me around for quite a while now, and he keeps going back and forth about whether or not we were doing Cabin in the Woods or Cabin Fever. So I was very confused.
Yeah, I keep saying Cabin Fever, and I think it's just my own personal
Cabin
quarantine mindset is bleeding into my real life in a very metatextual way.
Right, like how I realized that all of my wild card picks thus far have been essentially two people trapped alone in a house.
Yes, yeah,
Sorry, guys. I'll try to be a little less predictable with the next one.
Yeah, unfortunately, Cabin Fever is not on the list, and I don't foresee myself picking it as a wild card. So we won't probably ever, at least not anytime soon, be doing Cabin Fever, so I apologize. But Cabin in the Woods is number 30 on the list. How do you feel about that placement? Is it too high? Is it too low? Or is it good?
I think it should be probably somewhere in the hundreds.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that.
I'm willing to give it a lot of leeway in the hundreds, but I really don't. I don't think it should be 30. I mean, I know we always talk about The Shining, and that's number like 104 last time I think I checked.
113 currently.
Oh, blech. The Thing was also pretty high up in the hundreds, right? Like, I like this movie a lot. I think it does a lot of interesting, fun things. There's a lot of like kind of like fun references to other films and like, the sort of cornerstones of horror movies. But do I think that buys it the number 30 spot? Absolutely not.
Yeah, I would agree. This is not a rule that I think I've ever thought about before, but I have a hard time putting the meta version higher than the thing it's being meta about. So it's like, this is a great movie, but do I think this is a better movie than Evil Dead or Evil Dead 2? I probably would put those higher on the list than this. Both of those are lower on the list.
Yeah,
I would say over the 100 mark. I would be fine in the early hundreds if you really
Sure.
wanted to put it up high. But yeah, I think it needs to be past the halfway point.
Yeah, I agree, because it also, you know, comparing it again to our other meta horror movie blockbuster, like Scream was meta about a lot of a lot of preceding movies, but it then kicked off a whole new chain, a whole new style, a kind of like era in the genre. I don't think Cabin in the Woods had the same impact throughout all of horror movies.
Right. And Scream is number we just did it. It is number 175. So that's pretty low. And this is a movie, not to speak to the quality of the movie, but this movie actually got shelved for a couple years. Oddly enough,
wow.
Yeah, it was made by MGM, and then MGM went out of business. Well, that's not true. They still exist, but they were having money problems, so they had to shelve the movie. And it wasn't until Lionsgate bought it, like a couple years later, that it actually came out. So Chris Hemsworth shot this movie before he was cast as Thor, and it didn't come out until after Thor had come out.
Huh.
Yeah, so I'm not saying that doesn't speak to quality, but it's like clearly it wasn't a zeitgeisty movie the way that something like Scream was.
Right.
So
Right.
I do think it's great though. I really, really enjoy this movie,
Yeah.
and this is definitely
No,
one
I
that
agree.
I will watch more. Would you recommend it to somebody else?
I would recommend it to a pretty broad audience, because it has a lot of the horror movie elements and can be scary at times, but it's also like has enough levity and enough like gallows humor to sort of break that up. So if you're not somebody who's super into like, I sit down to watch horror movies because I really want to be scared. Like if that's not you, but you do sometimes like them, like I think this would work well in that case. I also think like it's just kind of a fun movie. Like you don't need to you can do what we did here and get like really into like talking about archetypes and like all of this stuff, but you can also just watch it and like enjoy the visuals and enjoy the design and like laugh at inappropriate moments.
Yeah, I think it works well. I think it can work well for most people because, and even down to the title of it, the stuff that they're talking about is fairly generic.
Yeah.
At least I should say the surface level of it is fairly generic, where it's Cabin in the Woods. Oh, this is like a send-up of slasher movie stuff, which is something everybody has like an idea about. It's like how everybody knows who Dracula is, even if they've never read the book or seen a Dracula movie. You understand the visual and like the fangs and I want to suck your blood and all that kind of stuff. It's horror movies with a killer stalking people in a cabin in the woods is pretty ubiquitous at this point. So even if you don't... Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, just everybody's in on it.
Right. So even if you don't have the deep enough working knowledge to look at that board of monsters and go like, oh, that's from Evil Dead. Oh, that's from Hellraiser. That's from Black... Even if you don't have that working knowledge, I still think it works because the comedy stuff I think works regardless. And just like I said earlier, I think it works enough as its own story that the meta stuff is just a nice next level to the enjoyment of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's going to do it, I think, for Cabin in the Woods, not Cabin Fever. And I've hit the randomizer button. Beep, boop, 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 beep, boop, 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 boop. And next time we're going to be heading overseas back in time to the 70s with number 73, Dario Argento's, I was going to say slasher, but it's a giallo. It's not a slasher movie. Giallo classic Deep Red, which I'm very excited to do.
I know nothing about this film.
Excellent. And you've seen Suspiria, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it'll be interesting because I remember. Have you seen many other Argento movies?
I am not sure. Not enough to be able to name any.
Sure.
No.
Well, it's interesting because when I saw Suspiria, I was really into it. I was like, oh, girl, yeah, awesome. I'm all of this all day. And when I went and watched his other stuff, I was surprised. I was surprised and slightly disappointed that it was not as, for lack of a better term, flamboyant as that one was. But they are very interesting nonetheless. And Deep Red is definitely one of his better non-Suspiria Giallo movies. So,
all right,
looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on it as a first-timer. And if you like what you hear, please give us a rating review on iTunes. That would be awesome. And thank you so much for joining me, Amanda.
Thank you, Clay.
And we will see you next time.
Bye, everyone.